So a few things I would like to briefly touch on. First off, this video is paired with a song, and that song will be in the description box if you'd like to listen to it before or after or during or not at all. Up to you. So a few ideas in this particular video. The song's title is Don't Get a Life, and it's by this band called THYX. I don't know how you pronounce that, but I'm pretty sure that band is connected with Mind in a Box somehow. I think one of the members went and created that, I'm not sure. Somehow it's connected. And it's saying don't get a life, stay where you are, and it's saying there's nothing there. And what he's talking about, as far as I understand, is he's saying those of you who are real, those of you who are not matrix bound, at least fully, he's saying don't get in there and try and get a life. Don't try and do that. There's nothing there. There was a Philip K. Dick book where it was involving drugs, and it involved a particular drug that was like a replicator. It was like a consciousness replicator drug, and it fucked everything up on the planet, and it ended up replicating this one particular character in and out and throughout the dimensions of the people. And this character was finding certain power and not even necessarily abusing it on purpose, but just being a being that did what he did. So he found this drug that allowed his consciousness to hop all over the place. It allowed him to seed his consciousness into other beings, become them, etc. And at one point in this book, there was a colony created on the moon. I've talked about this story before. But there was a colony created on the moon where people on Earth had mandatory terms that they had to serve there. And if you go up to the moon, life sucks. And there's not all of the things here, the pleasures, the comforts, the warmth, the humans. It's cold and kind of gross. But up there on the moon, when the people get up there, there's another drug. It's not the same one, but it can be utilized to create when you as a being are inside of an inhospitable environment. And the way that it's done is you have this little setup, you create a symbol setup. I'm gonna let that one go. You create a symbol setup. You have dolls and you have little miniature houses, and you create a setup. And then you take the drug while you're sitting there with your setup and you're looking at it. And what happens is it somehow ports your consciousness in a pseudo fashion back down to Earth, but it's a whitewashed, kind of a joke 15-minute reality where you go port yourself into Earth with that setup. And you know, if you had a toy Lamborghini or a toy Corvette, you're inside of that little setup, and you can drive the Corvette around, you can talk to the same people, and multiple people on the moon can inhabit. Say if you have a Ken doll and a Corvette, multiple people can inhabit the Ken at the same time, and they get to drive the Corvette, and then they get to go jump in the ocean if they want. But it's a weird reality, and it's not full in the sense that we remember the reality being full. It's one-dimensional transport system. And so they go and experience that, and they remember what it's like to be alive again, because life on the moon isn't really being alive. And then eventually they come back feeling unfulfilled, but still it gave them something where they previously had nothing. And this ties in with what you're expected to do here on Earth. And I know this is a degenerated form of Earth as well. This is not, like Lovett says, the Earth that we remember before the event or before the shifting started happening. It's something different. So we do the same thing here as with the guys on the moon. Here, when you're feeling upset that your life isn't going correctly, you arrange a set of toys on a piece of paper. Maybe you set up some symbols. You call it maybe a to-do list. Maybe you call it a New Year's resolution list. It's the same exact thing. So you set up on a piece of paper some symbols, and then you port your consciousness into that, right? And then you pull out into this constrict. We're not in the construct, we're in the constrict. You pull out into the constrict that set of symbols that now you're using your life force to try to get those symbols to come alive in this sort of dead-ish constrict. And the constrict doesn't want that. It doesn't want you like breathing life into symbols, because it's trying to be entropic. It's trying to wind itself down. But at the same time, it needs the life force inside of it to keep going. So it's like a Jekyll and Hyde character that tries to, it needs the living beings inside of it to give it energy, but the very nature of it that got it to be the way it is in the first place is sort of dead. So it has to try and inhibit those beings from being creative within it. And it gives more brownie points for the beings having fulfilled the letter of the symbol arrangement they put on the piece of paper, rather than them really getting into that and creating and then possibly adding more symbols, removing symbols, maybe throwing the piece of paper away and starting anew every 5 minutes, something like that, you know, but carrying the energetic tenor that started the symbol creation on the flat piece of paper in the first place. Instead of encouraging that, the constrict tells you, no, you must stick to that one arrangement of dolls, and you must stay two-dimensional, and it doesn't care how you, and again, this is the ego self that does this, it doesn't care how you fulfill the letter of the law, it just needs it to be fulfilled somehow. So if you put there on your little symbol arrangement and your piece of paper, you put like, today on my to-do list, I'm going to call mother, right? Anything can go on there, anything whatsoever. But the brownie point is given if you call mother, okay? You can call mother and hang up after it rings once. Do you understand? And then you get the brownie points. You see how that's backwards, right? It doesn't give you extra brownie points if you say, well, screw call mother, I'm gonna go visit mother. And I'm gonna go hang out with her, I'm gonna ask her how her life is going, and I'm gonna get in there and, you know, offer my support and whatever, give her a hug, all these things that you can do with your loved ones. No, it gives you brownie points if you fulfill the smallest amount of action towards that letter of the law. It's like you're working in apologetics. You're working as an apologetic, like Lovett was also talking about. When you're grasping onto one concept set and you're to the exclusion of all the other ones, i.e. religions, and you say, no, I did it, I called her, and in a court of law, that would be acceptable. I called mother. Go look at my phone history. And then you start getting into semantics, and you start juggling the words around, and you start doing acrobats and backbends and whatnot, all that stuff. And of course you can convince the judge that you called mother, because you say, well, the thing said call mother, I called mother, and what are you arguing about? But still you're in defense of the constrict, and you're not in defense of we should have a fully engaged, fully malleable life at all times. That's one piece, right? That's the papier-mâché world that you create via words, and then you try to fulfill that letter of the law to the exclusion of all the other elements of life. Because that's what ego mind likes, is it likes those little brownie points. And then the repeating starts happening, right? So that's one thing I wanted to touch on. Another piece is the idea of loops, causal loops, the idea of the fractal set repeating itself, and the consciousness again getting trapped in that repetition via the parasite, the double vision. We've talked about this before as well. So if you take the idea that most of you have probably heard, which past life review, right? You've heard of that. Say you live 70 years, you die, and you go into a life review. I want to ask you what that would look like, and would it look necessarily different than what we're currently doing? Imagine that you're currently inside of your life review. You're watching, via a holographic projection system, you're watching, essentially reliving, with the time aspect kind of fucked up, that whole life, right? You're reliving it. How would it be different than you actually living the first one? I had this idea the other day of, if you imagine the entropic state of the current affairs is setting up for some sort of obliteration or destruction en masse, right? On a large scale, a universal scale, perhaps multi-dimensional scale, probably not. This is probably just a blip, but I don't know. But just imagine if you're inside of that, and you were inside of this loop, and the loop wants to repeat itself in every single aspect. It wants to fractal out the pattern appropriately, like as patterns do. They want to continue on. They don't like being disrupted. So how would you, as the living consciousness inside of that pattern Mandelbrot set that's trying to repeat, how would you not just let it repeat over and over? Because consciousness doesn't like doing that, obviously. Consciousness likes being free. Well, what would happen is you as the consciousness would let the thing repeat for the most part, and being that you're multi-dimensional, you would find the finer aspects and you would sit in that, and you would let this thing, this holographic 3D apparent motion Mandelbrot set, you would let it continue doing its thing, because for the most part it's not concerned about your consciousness, so long as you're not making massive waves and disrupting the entire program. So your movements within that then would be on the subtle scale that isn't registered by the recording device that's trying to repeat, because the recording device is trying to do the same thing as I was talking about with the dolls, and the trying to animate the concepts. it wants the least requirement fulfilled as far as repetition, because it can't be itself with the larger knowledge of the multidimensional world, because that would fuck up its perfect little arrangement. That's why the people living their lives in this life seemingly don't care about anything but glomming onto the giant symbol system. The symbol-minded. Symbols are for the symbol-minded, like Levette said. But they don't seem to have life outside of constant regurgitation and blathering on about holidays, gotta get a job, the economy. You know, they repeat like, I don't know, 7 different symbols, concepts, and then they talk about those, but they stay in tight orbit. You know, they're satelliting those given large symbols, and they're getting brownie fucking points by the shitload. They're just getting inundated with brownie points by the system, which loves that shit. And they exclude anything else that doesn't pertain. So for all of those of you who are complaining about the NPCs, or, you know, they react, and they strongly react when I try to say anything outside of the thing, and they seem to talk about the same shit all the time. That's what they're doing. They're sitting there scooping up brownie points. They're squeezing out the endorphins and the feel-goods to the last drop. That's exactly what they're doing. And yes, they don't like you because you're threatening it. Obviously. And when we do, those of us who are not doing that, okay, we have still the program, that niggling little hook thing that is always sitting there saying, you need to stop fucking up. You know, you need to get with the program. I still try to do it. I'm still trying to do it with this current thing that I'm doing with Lyft. Right? The pieces, when you're not on board with the construct, the options become dwindling more and more. And we all know this. They dwindle and they dwindle. And at some point, there probably aren't any more options, and you're probably walking down the street. And that's just what it is. And you have an opportunity to sell out, so to speak, at every corner. That's the narrow path. Are you going to sell out, or you're not going to sell out? Like when Og says, don't give up now because you're not going to get your reward. He's not talking about the reward, he's talking about the don't give up now part. Because it will spit you out. It's going to spit you out at some point. It's going to spit all of us out. That's what being strong means, is maintaining your tightrope walk. You're dancing on the razor blade, you maintain that. You're not gonna so-called succeed by getting a life in the construct. You're not. That's not a life. That's the zombie land. That's the living dead. Don't get a life, just stay where you are. He's saying be present. What does that mean? Every single thing gets wrapped up into every single person's present moment. All the people who are snorting crack, all of the interdimensionals that are here, all of the archons that are pretending to be humans, that are fucking babies and eating children or whatever is going on, drinking adrenochrome, anything that's going on, every thought that somebody has, okay, all of that is just a cloud that partially comprises everybody's present moment. That's why it looks so fucking weird, because people are weird. Not to mention if they get sucked in by this or that energy or this or that substance, that goes into the collective subconscious, unconscious, and everything is the same thing. So those of us who aren't doing that currently are sort of picking up the slack for the ones who are doing that. The ones who aren't living out the ego desires to that extent are holding the space for the ones who are doing it. And I'm not saying that this is some worthy, like, now everybody, you know, who's holding up the slack. No, it's just what it is. Maybe you get brownie points for doing that somewhere on down the road, but you know, there has to be made way somehow for everyone to have their experience. So for the ones who need to murder people, for the ones who need to be dictators, for the ones who need to be, you know, savants, the ones that need to be saviors, the ones that need to be the most giant hypocrite possible forever and ever and never see a bit of it, maybe not even until they die, maybe not even then. There needs to be somehow created a space where they can coincide and live in the same present, because everyone's in the same present. It's not a different one. There has to be somehow made a way for that to happen. And the way that's made to happen is, you know, while someone's like, hey, here's a pool of diarrhea, I just really want to jump in there, you know, and experience that. Well, they need someone to be holding the rope that is tied around their waist. So once they've gotten their fill of that pool of diarrhea, you know, someone can pull their ass out and clean them off. And the third thought form I wanted to discuss today was the idea of this construct that we're in. It's construct, it's a consciousness construct. The body itself is a constricting, painful lens for the consciousness to inhabit. It's very painful. And you have to forget about your multidimensional aspects in order for you to stay in here, because you'll pop out. You'll explode the whole realm in a second if you can't remember those things, because this place is so, you know, it's like it's a vice grip. So the help that we receive from the outside, that which is not this paper mache cutout realm, you know, being activated by the living essence that's trapped inside of it, those that wish to help, it's like there's a solid ball, and the ones on the outside are like, my friends are in there somehow. I don't know how they're in there, but they're in there, and I gotta help them somehow. I don't know how. I can't even fit inside of that ball, but they'll sit there and they'll press their hand on the ball, and they'll like do some Reiki or something. They'll be like, you know, breathe some Reiki into that giant solid ball that they know their friends are somehow trapped inside of. And so a little tiny bit of their life essence is able to like sneak through the barrier and maybe touch someone inside, and the person, they get some tingles, maybe they get some sort of new insights or something. They get a feeling of protection somehow, because this being on the outside is pressing their hand against this giant solidified ball of shit that you're stuck inside of. And they can't fit inside of that. They can't do whatever magic you pull off to get inside of that ball. Your friends on the outside can't do that. They're having to, like, you know, whisper sweet nothings at it and see if a little bit of that can penetrate and go and touch you and give you something. You know? That's why when we sit here inside of this thing and we pray, or we, you know, scream and cry, do whatever we need to do to somehow manage to hold up some hope in here, it's not just heard. It's just as hard to communicate with those beings on the outside as it is for them to communicate with us in here. They can't fit in here. The multidimensional self can't fit in here. Just the tiniest bit of your essence can fit in here. But you're not any less of that multidimensional self while you're in here. And when you're doing the little setup, you know, you're like, here's my little setup. I got a toy Lamborghini, or I got a toy Corvette, and I got a toy palm tree, and I got a toy house, okay? And I'm gonna sit there and stare at that all day long, and I'm gonna try to breathe some life into that, okay? You do that, and it's not easy to manifest that here. You have to go through all kinds of shit. You have to kiss ass. You have to worship the beast. You have to worship the money god. You have to worship hierarchy. You have to step on your neighbor's toes and their face and everything else. And then eventually you're gonna get the Corvette. The toy Corvette will turn into a real Corvette. You're gonna be able to drive it around, and you're gonna have the real house, and you're gonna have the real palm tree. Of course, you don't know any of this because the government owns everything, and the queen owns everything, and the blah, 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 right? So you don't ever actually have it here when you have it, but it feels like you have it. But what I'm saying is, going through all of that work and all of that selling of your soul, further selling of your soul, to get the toy Corvette to turn into a real Corvette, that's what he's saying in the song when he's saying, don't get a life. That's what he's saying. Check the song out. I gotta go, guys. I hope everyone's doing well. Take care. Peace.